I'm your host, Grayson Brulte. Welcome to another episode of SAE Tomorrow Today, a show about emerging technology and trends in mobility with leaders and innovators who make it all happen. On today's episode, we're absolutely honored to be joined by Todd Tuthill, Managing Partner, Rincon Aerospace. On today's episode, we'll break down what's changing in defense and aerospace industries. We hope you enjoy this episode. Todd, welcome back.
Grayson, I guess that means I'm a veteran, of this particular podcast. Looking forward to it. Can't wait to talk about all things aerospace.
You're a veteran, but you're also a great guest who brings incredible insights. And now you're not part of a big corporation, so I can ask you more pointed questions these days.
Ask away. Just ask away.
You were in big corporations for 30 years, Boeing, Raytheon, Siemens. Now you're on your own. You started your own firm. Why? What did you see in the market?
Well, yeah, again, it's a couple things, market conditions and places in my career. So, I've got my cell phone here, and I want you to think about the times we're living in. Because right now, today, if you or I wanted to go anywhere on the planet, pretty much, we could pick up our cell phone, book a flight, and fly there. That exists today. But pretty soon, Grayson, you and I are going to fly, in our lifetime, we're going to fly in George Jetson's car. We're going to be jetting around cities in flying cars. And maybe for the weekend, I say, I want to take a vacation. I want to be in low Earth orbit for the weekend. That's going to happen in our lifetimes. And there's just so much cool things, so much innovation, so much money going into the aerospace market right now. But the problem is the money and the innovation has outpaced the staffing and the people to do the work. And I looked at that market condition, and I looked at where I was at in my career, and I've led a lot of programs, done a lot of things. And that's what led me to really start this company called Rincon Aerospace. And I do consulting to companies, large and small, more small than large, but across the board, to really help them start their programs, do things more efficiently. Because all these companies with all this money, these things happening, the one common theme is they've all got to do more work more efficiently with fewer resources. And I've had to do a lot of those things in my career. I've led programs, and I'm really in a position where I can help and mentor the next generation to really bring about all these innovations. So it's just a confluence of a bunch of things, and a really exciting time in my career, and I'm happy that I really get an opportunity to do it. So that's kind of the story of Rincon Aerospace and why I started it.
We're in a very exciting time in technology across the board. You have the rise of AI agents, obviously the generative AI, but low Earth orbit for the weekend. That's cool. You've got my George Jetson interest going. What is it going to take to make that a reality? And is this going to be Stanley Kubrick's 2001, where we're going to, obviously they had the Pan Am flight back then, but we don't have Pan Am anymore. What's that going to look like?
So again, you're talking the George Jetson thing or the on orbit thing?
Let's go to low Earth orbit.
Okay, low Earth orbit. So just enormous innovation, and I think, I'm kind of fortunate. I live in Southern Arizona. And one of the cool things I can do here is I can see a lot of the launches from Vandenberg, the base in California. And they happen in the evening, and there's just so many more launches. You think about the innovation, the disruption driven by companies like SpaceX and now companies like Firefly. So one of the key barriers to entry to low Earth orbit forever has been, how do I get it there? There's only a few companies in the world who could create a rocket with the ability to push something to low Earth orbit. Well, that's been democratized now. And there's a lot of companies, I mentioned too, SpaceX and Firefly, that are building rockets that can get there. They can get things to low Earth orbit. Of course, there's the big guys like Northrop and Boeing. We've been working with NASA and ULA, companies like that can get there. But we've really gotten the technology to where we can get more things to low Earth orbit and higher orbits better than any time in the future. And then the reusability, and you see things like, rockets landing back and being caught on platforms or landing on platforms. It's just the innovation, the technology has enabled and really significantly lowered the price per pound to orbit. That's one of the big things.
I mean, this is a high level, but is reusable rockets, is that the key breakthrough that's enabling this?
Well, it's reusable rockets, but it's just the ability for all these companies. That there's so many companies. I mentioned a couple. I could mention Blue Origin as well. They've been in the news lately too. But just with the ability to put these things on orbit, because that's been the barrier. It's low Earth orbit's not that far away, in terms of miles, but in terms of breaking through gravity and the technology and the ability to get there, it's been an impossible thing to reach for all these companies. And it's just not impossible anymore. A lot of companies can proven they can do it. We got multiple bases. I talked about Vandenberg. There's space bases in Texas now. Of course, we've got the Space Coast in Florida, and just more places to launch from, more abilities to launch, all these things. It's just becoming a thing that commercial companies can't afford to do.
Do you feel, obviously, for all practical purposes, SpaceX is still a startup? Yes, they're a little older, but compared to your traditional primes, they're a startup. And you see how fast they're innovating and how fast they're pushing the envelope forward. Is that causing your big traditional companies to say, wait a second, we got to do something here. We're moving too slow here to move faster?
Absolutely. And you saw it. You think about the issue, the big PR nightmare that the first crewed mission that Boeing launched the space station about a year ago or so, and they had to be rescued by SpaceX. Terrible, horrible. It was bad just for the country. It was bad for the astronauts that had to stay there for several months, but it was pretty bad PR for Boeing too to have to be rescued. So certainly, I think it's driving the big companies like that to innovate, but it's also showing customers like government customers, NASA, the DoD customers, to say other things are possible. They don't have to stick with the big primes anymore. There are alternatives, and these smaller, like you said, I think SpaceX isn't small and isn't a startup anymore, but they're certainly teaching the world that there are other ways to do things, and giving all these creating alternatives, I think, to what can be done.
Well, there's alternatives. The U.S. defense budget is nearing $1 trillion fiscal year 2026. NATO's reaffirmed their 5% commitment, but you say startup, great opportunity, but then you say, oh, well, traditional primes have an army of lobbyists and well-paid ex-generals on their payroll. How do startups overcome that when some of them, for all practical purposes, have a technological advantage?
Well, if you think about it, we talk about money, and you've heard the old phrase, a rising tide lifts all boats. And that's certainly happening in the defense industry right now because there's so much money. And you're right, the primes have an advantage that they have the money, the infrastructure, the lobbyists, those kind of things. But there's just so many more things happening, so much more to do. They can't do it all. And it's not, because we talk about the primes and the smaller startups as if it's one against the other. And sometimes it is. But a lot of times it's not one against the other. I mean, you think about a situation happening with a smaller startup now called Jet Zero, blended wing body company. They're known for, they've got contracts to do commercial aircraft, to do commercial transports, but they've also got contracts from the DoD. If you look at one of the biggest investors, it's Northrop. Northrop's interested in big wings. Jet Zero's got the big wing technology they're investing in it. A similar thing is happening right now with another startup called Wisk. Wisk was a company, struggling a bit for a while, got a big infusion of cash from Boeing. Wisk is an autonomy company. Boeing is interested in autonomy. So it's certainly, there's back and forth, big primes, small primes. We can talk about Anduril and what's happening there in the weapons industry and how they're kind of disrupting companies like Raytheon and Lockheed. But certainly in a lot of cases, you're seeing these big primes invest in those smaller startups because they need the technology and they need the intellectual capital, the people to help them do the things they need to do. So we're seeing both.
Are you seeing the primes come in seed rounds, A rounds early, or is it when a company starts to struggle, they say, well, here we are, and we're going to get pennies on the dollar?
It's all of the above. I think I just read an article, I believe Jet Zero just had a round of Series B funding. I think that was just announced a few weeks ago. And a lot of that funding, a big part of that, I think, came from Northrop and RTX. So they're certainly doing some of the seed rounds of funding. And it's all of the above. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all kind of a solution. And it's back to, kind of where we started. today. We talked about the opportunities, the innovation, all the places to go from everywhere from commercial travel to defense to commercial space. And there aren't enough, there's a finite amount of people and capacity to do these things. And it's kind of all hands on deck to get this done. And I think the primes see that, and they have the capability, to invest, to buy, to support, and sometimes to compete in all of these areas.
Well, I mean, they have the cash flow, and if the president has his way, they can't do dividends and share buys, so they're going to have to invest in the technology. But these traditional companies have traditional ways of thinking, traditional ways of doing things, and there's a lot of blind spots there because this is the way we do things. We've done it for sometimes centuries. What are some of those big blind spots that you see having the experience, but now you're on the outside? What are some of those big blind spots that you see today?
Two of them, I think they're related: speed and agility. If you think about a big prime, and we can think of it on the defense side or the commercial side, either way, they have processes, they have things in place because the stuff they do. Used to say they're not making toasters, right? They're making complex, sophisticated, aircraft that carry people, weapon systems. They have to work the first time. They have to work every time, and sometimes they create this infrastructure, this process in their company where it's this big monolithic thing that's very hard to change. It's kind of like, a 5-mile train. Sometimes we have near our houses here that I wait on for 45 minutes. Pretty hard to stop that train and turn it around. And that becomes sometimes their blind spots. And that's why some of these smaller companies that don't have all of that infrastructure, all of the processes, they can innovate quickly. And I think that's some of the blind things leading to the blind spots of not moving fast and not having the agility that I think a lot of their higher level customers want them to have.
I mean, well, on top of that is thinking. Do you think that their teams, if you want to call them internal skunks work teams, not developing products, but it's thinking about different ways to do things and looking at it from the outside of trying to basically break the mold so they don't get out innovated?
Oh, absolutely. That's going on, and these big companies didn't get to become these big successful companies by doing things the wrong way. That there are pockets of that in companies, but one of the things that I think these companies struggle with is culture too, because you've got the leadership sees and knows the way things need to go. Many times there's people in the companies that are used to doing things in certain ways. That's how they've always done them. That's how they want to continue to do them. And sometimes those are the people in charge at the mid levels, and they it's in sometimes even in their best interest to continue to do things in the old style, in the old ways. It's hard to change culture. Think of, the Betamax VCR thing, right? The Betamax was a better thing. It was better, but VCR won. And, if you don't have gray hair like me and you have no idea what I'm talking about, Google it. You'll get the analogy for your listeners who maybe don't have the gray hair I do.
Betamax was a superior product, and Sony pushed it, but we saw the same thing, which happened with the Blu-ray versus HD DVD. A certain industry pushed it, and then lo and behold, that became the all-purpose, the de facto standard. You look at traditional primes, they're basically de facto standard. They operate in similar manners. Now, stepping back, in your opinion, what led to the rise of Anduril? How did Anduril become? Palmer Luckey had this great idea for a startup to being a pretty significant company in a short period of time.
You had some really good ideas from some really smart, risky people who entered the market at exactly the right time. I always think of Anduril as the Silicon Valley startup that happens to do weapons. And they entered the market at just the right time when there was a real need. You think about that the DoD was pushing change and pushing innovation, and I think pushing agility. And when they start to do that, if you think about what used to be seen as the barrier to entry for a lot of these big monolithic programs, and the barrier to entry was so high that it was very difficult for a new company to start up. And you have somebody like Anduril comes in with some great ideas, some backing, and really the nerve and the risk to risk that money to try to do new innovative things. And they had some early success, which they built upon, and then they were able to actually go take people away from some of the big primes. Because, that we talked about culture, there's people in the big primes who are kind of invested in the way things work. There's also people in the big primes that are saying, I'm kind of tired of all the process and the things that are hard to change. I'd kind of like to try to do something new and fun and innovative. And they pulled some of those people away, and, success breeds success. They had some early success, and then some more, and then more people wanted to come. And it's been a pretty incredible story over the past 6 or 7 years of what Anduril's been able to do. And I think they'll continue. I think they continue to innovate and continue to grow.
And the other thing that's not discussed a lot, it's basically what Anduril's done. They've created an ecosystem, because there are other companies that say, you know what? We're not afraid to work with the government. And this is public record, by the way. You remember the outcry over the JEDI contract, over the cloud compute and these companies, oh, you can't work with the government. Those days have gone away. We're now starting saying, we're not afraid to work with the government. And another thing I've noticed quite a bit lately, DARPA's starting to get a lot more public and more challenges, more innovations, more breakthroughs. It seems that, and I'm not using a political term, but it seems like we're going into the golden age of startups going into the defense and aerospace sector.
Absolutely. And certainly we haven't talked about DARPA yet, but a lot of money and a lot of opportunity there, a lot of funding for DARPA, really driving innovation. And it's kind of, you look at, it's kind of a bigger version to some extent. If you look at what's happening in Ukraine right now and what they've been able to do. And I've just been amazed looking in from the outside of how they've been able to innovate and develop this whole industry around drones. That really didn't exist too much in Ukraine at all before the war. And if you look at the things they've been able to accomplish with duct tape and baling wire in their garages in Ukraine, and launch these big attacks against this big chunk of infrastructure in Russia. It's incredible what they've been able to do. And, and you're seeing the desire for that and the push for that in Europe and the US now are kind of looking at what's happening in Ukraine, saying they've done that. Why can't we do that? Why can't we innovate that quickly and that rapidly? And certainly we don't have guns pointed at us like the people in Ukraine do and suffering from attacks every night like they are. But I think there's concern, especially in the part of countries in Europe right now, that could happen to them too. And that's driving a lot of this innovation, I think.
And staying on the innovation theme, what's going to happen when AI agents leave the browser and get into the defense and aerospace sector? What do you think is going to happen?
Well, what I hope happens is that, from 30 years in aerospace, right, I think about all the things I've done and the things I've seen my engineers do. And I got tired of watching very highly skilled, highly trained, highly capable engineers do really mundane things. And I hope the first thing those agents do is they really take away a lot of the mundane work that a lot of these engineers are doing. And we talked about at the top of the podcast here, the shortage in workers. And I hope that those agents really free up the human engineers to really do higher level human thinking things and take a lot of that mundane work away. And I think that's where they're going, and that's my hope. So that's what I hope happens. We're not quite there yet, but I think we're on the way.
The productivity gains that AI agents, I ran an experiment the other day, is about, I don't know, it'd probably take you 3 weeks to code it. I went to bed, I woke up, and the work was done. The AI agent ran all, and I was like, wow, this is incredible. And then this morning I was reading an article, and this blew my mind, that if you look at the Fortune 500 companies, less than 1% have fully implemented AI across the board. It's like, oh my God, there's so many places to go and so much productivity to be unlocked. On the defense and aerospace sector, are we seeing AI unlocked across the organization, or is it still the early days?
It's still very much the early days. I think there's some legitimate concern from aerospace companies, defense companies, especially in the area of trust. And I think it goes to two areas. The first area that a lot of aerospace companies are concerned about is, can I trust it with my data? If when you think about the traditional way of, I have a server, I have a piece of software, I put my files in a certain place, I put protections around that, I can see and understand where my data goes and how it's being used. AI tends to be a bit more of a black box to understand exactly where it's going and how it's used. So I think there's a concern of trust of data, and then there's a concern of trust of results. I'm guessing that the AI agent that you created and used recently, Grayson, it was probably not something that was critical to your life or health, right?
No, it's just a pure experiment.
Pure experiment, right? And I think that's what we're seeing, and we're seeing AI agents do a lot of things. I use AI and AI agents pretty often to prepare for things, but I'm not using them yet for really mission critical things. I think as the technology matures, we're going to go further and further down the path of trusting them more and more. There's an example I've used before that I love. It goes way back. It'll show you my gray hair. I remember the day, it was about, I don't know, 50 years ago or so. I remember the day my father first brought a real digital calculator home to the house. Still, he bought it. My dad was a real kind of technical guy, and he brought it home. And I still have this vision of my dad. He had a piece of paper. He did a bunch of manual arithmetic on the paper, and then he entered the equations into the calculator, because he wasn't sure he wanted to trust that digital device until he proved it could do what he could do. And I think that's the path we're taking with AI right now on a much bigger scale. People need to get to the point where they can trust it, and we're getting further and further. We're seeing it in things like media, and I use Google Nano Banana all the time. It's wonderful. But I'm not using it for mission critical stuff. That's going to change. And that's the trust factor and the understanding factor that we've got to implement in the defense agencies. And we're beginning to do that. They're using it in smaller scales. We're going to see it more and more, and it's going to increase more rapidly, back to the problems we have of there aren't enough people, there aren't enough resources to do the things we need to do. AI can really help in that area of doing things faster with fewer people. And I think that just is good. That problem is going to breed the necessity of, let's figure out how to do more and more with AI.
Was that calculator a TI?
I don't remember. I remember it was, this was a big block calculator that had, the 7 segment displays, and it had 4 functions, add, divide, add, multiply, subtract, and divide, right? That's all it did. And, I remember, Dad used it, pressed it, and then he trusted it. So imagine that today. When's the last time you went to the store, bought a calculator? I guess at all, but questioned a calculator, even a spreadsheet or a computer in basic arithmetic? We don't question that anymore. We just accept for a fact that it's going to work. We're not there with agentic AI yet, but or large language models for that matter, but we're going to get there.
Well, let's stay on the TI theme here from a war perspective. We'll go back to Vietnam, because there is a very public, well-documented chip. In Vietnam, we weren't able to successfully hit bridges and bomb bridges. And then for the first time, they put a TI chip in the bomb. It was able to hit the bridge. Hey, oh, wow, this is the greatest thing. We can hit bridges in Vietnam. And then all suddenly, right, that chip infrastructure across defense took off. So do we have to wait for that bridge moment in AI? This big magical breakthrough, and then all suddenly everybody goes all in, just like they did with chips and bombs?
Well, there's probably a bridge moment. I don't know if it's one moment, but it's several. I mean, if you look at, we haven't talked about infrastructure in terms of power and servers, but one of the other problems we have with AI isn't just, can I trust the software? But it's, do I have the power and the infrastructure to run it? And the incredible things that NVIDIA is doing, and the announcements that they just made at CES a few weeks ago, just with the simple fact of how much less power some of their new chips are going to create, which, is wonderful for us, really, really bad for the companies that 6 months ago invested hundreds of millions of dollars in their old technology to build a big server farm. But so that we've got to solve a number of those problems, and again, we talk about AI in general terms, but there's all kinds of AI. There's the AI that runs locally on a device that's flying around, and there's AI that runs in a server farm somewhere, and there's a number of problems, just power being one of them. We have to solve all of those things before AI is going to be universally accepted. And fortunately, there's a number of great companies like NVIDIA doing all kinds of innovation to help us do that.
You bring up a valid point about energy. There are parts of the Permian Basin where they're paying companies to take away natural gas. They're paying you to take the natural gas away because there's such an abundance. And you're correct about the chips. If you look at the ARM architecture, very low power. Qualcomm, their CEO is now, Davos did a whole interview how they're going low power. So you're right. You're seeing, if you want to call a shifting market, it went from lots of water, lots of power to low power. Your consulting says, how are you preparing your clients for, if you want to call the rolling waves of change, because there's a lot of change coming, especially in aerospace and defense. How are you preparing for these waves of change?
Well, I think that's a pretty broad question because there's waves of change in several areas. But I think it's, you look at people, process, technology, culture, and it's all of those things. You can't just change one of them. We talked about Betamax VCR. The best technology doesn't always win. It takes the technology, it takes the people and the culture to want to use the technology, and then it takes an infrastructure or a process to implement it. And you've got to use all three. And so when I talk to clients and customers, I talk about doing all three of those things, not just, okay, here's some shiny, just because, let's say, Grayson, you go back to your example of the AI agents. Let's say you're now running a company. You're the CEO, you went off this weekend and coded something with an AI agent and said, this is the greatest thing in the world. You went into your staff and say, well, just go do it. Well, that's a great technology, but I've got to really put the infrastructure and process in my company to be able to use it. And I've got to have the culture to want to use it. And it's all of those things. And so when I talk to companies and consult with companies, I talk about all of those things, not just the technology. It's the big picture.
You have to have the big picture. Let's shift, because you've got a really great understanding of the commercial aviation industry. And for the past 10 years, it's like, oh, we're going hydrogen flight. Oh, we're going electric flight. Oh, no, wait, we're going to stay with Jet A. What's the ground truth to where this is going? Actually, if you see the CEO of United on TV, Kirby, you see Oscar Munez, he's talking about leadership. Scott Kirby, he's talking about the revenue, and they get a bash from Delta. They're talking about, oh, by the way, there's a K-shaped economy and business is doing well, coach is not doing well. The whole where we're going, fuel's changing, that went bye-bye.
That is such an interesting topic. We could do a 3 podcasts on that just alone. Let me see if I can summarize it quickly. So if you think about what's happening today, with this backlog of more than 17,000 aircraft, commercial aircraft right now, if I want to buy a new aircraft, I have $100 million in my pocket, go to Airbus or Boeing, great, we'll have it for you in 10 years. And so, but they're cranking out jets as fast as they can crank them out. If you look at those jets, they're all tube and wing. They all have engines that burn fossil fuel. You talked about Jet A, right? That's the reality. And the lifespan of those aircraft is about 30 years. So if you think about the net zero 2050 regulation, that's 24 years from now. Every single thing rolling off the assembly line today, all those jets will be in operation in 2050, and they're all burning fossil fuel. So we're not going to hit 2050. We're just not. The goals that we set in the Paris Climate Accord in 2015, and there's all kinds of reasons. We get into geopolitical. I don't know if we even want to go there. But just from a technological standpoint and from a financial standpoint, we're not going to eliminate fossil fuel, carbon from fossil fuel in the aerospace industry, the commercial aerospace industry, by 2050. So what's the alternative? Where are we going? Well, I think the near term, and I'll say near term, next 15 years, the best option we have going right now is efficiency, is burning less fuel. And there's a couple key ways I think the industry is doing that. One of them is more efficient engines. We're seeing a lot of that, but that's an asymptotic curve, I think, with engines. We're getting to the point where the standard kind of jet engine we have is going to get more efficient, not a lot more efficient. I think the real innovations we're going to see in the next 15 years in the realm of aerodynamics. I mentioned a company like Jet Zero before. I don't know if you know about their blended wing body aircraft. There's another similar company called Nautilus, and they're saying that, and I believe them, that these aircraft are going to burn 50% less fuel. So if we switch from the traditional tube and wing aircraft to a much more efficient blended wing aircraft, we can move people for 50% less fuel. So 50% less fuel is 50% less carbon. And I think in the near term, next 15 years, what we're going to see to reduce the carbon footprint of commercial aircraft industry is not going to be no carbon or no fossil fuel. It's going to be let's use a lot less of it. And that goes to kind of a win-win situation, because it's probably a $1 trillion problem if you think about trying to switch over this whole industry. We can't do that if it's going to bankrupt the industry. So we need something that uses less carbon, but is also cheaper. Well, fuel is about, I think, 30% of the cost of operating an aircraft is the fuel. Well, if I get 15% of my operating costs back by using a blended wing aircraft because I use half the fuel, that's an incredible win-win situation. That's why we're going to see, I think, those kind of innovations in the near term. In the long term, we need some new technology, some new stuff that just doesn't exist yet to power our aircraft. And there's some things out there, but I don't see that viable technology replacing fossil fuel to power aircraft happening in big ways in the next 15 years.
What is it? So I've had dinner with the founder of Nautilus, and we had some really interesting, deep conversations about blended wing.
Alexei, yeah, he's a great guy. I've met him too. Yeah,
he's awesome. He came down here and we had this really great dinner. Mm-hmm. What is it with blended wing that enables the fuel efficiency? And then you've got 30 years experience, so I have to ask, why was it never adopted until now? It's not even adopted, but it's being rapidly explored, I would say.
Okay, so two questions. First, why is it better? It's simple lift over drag. If you think of the lift over drag ratio, you just think about it from an aerodynamic standpoint. If you think of a 737, where does most of the lift come from? There's a little bit of lift from the body. It's a tube, but most of the lift comes from the wings. The wings are not a substantial part of the surface area of the aircraft. The body is. So now you think of a blended wing body, now the entire aircraft is a wing. So there's far, far more surface area, surface area that people set inside that contains the fuel, that everything, that surface area is directly contributing to lift. So there's a lot more area of the aircraft, workable area, that causes lift. So that makes them far more efficient. So that's why blended wing body aircraft are so far more efficient in simplistic terms. Now, the other interesting question is, why haven't we tried before? Well, the reality is we have. And there have been people who've tried and tried and tried. And I guess I'll go back to maybe the analogy of 20 years ago and Steve Jobs and the iPod. And I remember, if you remember back, there was the big iPod and there was the iPod Shuffle. And I remember watching some of those keynotes, and the analysts were shocked because Steve Jobs would come on stage and he was brave enough to say, this is the best selling piece of electronics on the market. It's obsolete. I'm throwing it away. I'm going to create something brand new. He was willing to do that. Okay. The big aerospace companies, Boeing being one of them, were building these big tube and wing aircraft. And they had people inside the company that were saying, let's use blended wing. Well, to do that, again, they're making all this money. They're selling all these aircraft. If a company like Airbus or Boeing, who has a backlog of all these thousands of aircraft, says, well, in 3 years or 4 years, I'm going to release a blended wing body aircraft that's far more efficient, what are their customers going to do? They're going to say, I don't want the old version. I don't want that old version of the iPod anymore. I want the new one that Steve Jobs just introduced, right? The big companies like Boeing and Airbus, if they're going to release some kind of new technology that's disruptive like that, and they announce it, they have to announce it, and then they've got to sell the older stuff for 3 or 4 more years. And I think it was an economic thing that caused them to say, what's the motivation? We're still making incredible amounts of money here. There's a backlog right now of 17,000 aircraft. What's the motivation for me to go invest $5 billion, $10 billion in a new aircraft to do that? So they haven't. So what we're seeing is new companies like Nautilus and Jet Zero, who don't have all that history and that backlog, and those customers are coming in and saying, well, if the big guys won't do it, I will. Because I don't have all this infrastructure and things behind me. I'm not risking shareholder value and what's going to happen in the next quarter by releasing this. So I think that's a big reason why we haven't seen it till today.
What you described, this is, again, well documented, there's even a Harvard Business case study on this, is the IBM problem. until Lou Gerstner came, and then he did well, and then it went back to being IBM again. And it's sad because you have to innovate at the end of the day. From a practical standpoint, let's just put the consumer hat on, or let's just say you, Todd, you're the CEO of say LAX or Hartfield Jackson. Do you have to update the infrastructure of the airport to support blended wing, or can it integrate into the overall existing operation?
No, if you go to the websites for the Jet Zero Nautilus, you're going to see that's a big part of what they're trying to do. They're making the aircraft they're going to deliver fit into the existing infrastructure, because that would be dead on arrival. If I've got 1,000 tube and wing aircraft they're going to land at my aircraft today, and I've got 5 blended wing bodies tomorrow, where am I going to support it, right? And those they take new infrastructure. I'm probably not going to be crazy about creating new gates and new everything. So they're specifically designing at least the first generation of these blended wing body aircraft to fit seamlessly into the current infrastructure of current airports. So yeah, they're absolutely in. And not just that, but another thing that they're doing, kind of, you didn't ask the question, but I'll answer a question you didn't ask, is in terms of risk. One of the other things you're seeing both of these companies do is the innovations in the airframe. And if you look at how they're designing their aircraft, they're partnering with existing companies. They're taking off-the-shelf engines, off-the-shelf flight controls, off-the-shelf avionics, off-the-shelf landing gear, because that's not the innovation. That's not where they're going to make this plane work better. It's the airframe. So the innovation is in a better airframe and a better way to produce the airframe, and then take all this already certified, already operational stuff and put it on that airframe, reducing the risk of the initial designs. Now, as these become more popular, you're going to see more things custom designed for this blended wing body aircraft, but not in the initial version. They can't take the risk, and they can't afford the cost to design things specifically for their aircraft, other than the airframe.
Then there's the risk of the consumer. Do you think the consumer is comfortable and, most importantly, trustworthy to go into blended wing? Me, I'm like, oh, B-52 bomber, cool, yes, sign me up. And there's a lot of little kids like me that say that, but the adult's going to buy the ticket. Do you think they'll be comfortable?
I think it's just like the calculator example in My Father, that there's going to be some early adopters who are going to use the calculators or the blended wing body aircraft or whatever, and are going to be happy with it. And it's going to hopefully operate very successfully. And it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to happen slowly. And the early adopters like you and me are going to say, let's go. I want to fly my blended wing body to San Francisco and get on a rocket and go spend the weekend in orbit. People like you and I are going to do that. Then as other people see that it's safe and it's fun, and oh, by the way, the tickets are cheaper too, because the airline can operate at a less expensive cost. And not just that, but I've been to the Jet Zero facility in Long Beach. And they've got this incredible mock-up of what the inside of the aircraft is going to be. And it's just a whole different feeling when you walk around inside that blended wing body aircraft. And the time to get on the aircraft will be quicker. The time to get off will be quicker. The experience inside it will be better. It's just going to be a better experience all the way around for the flying public. And I think, like anything else, the free market's going to win. They're going to have a better product that's cheaper, that's more comfortable, and eventually, I think everyone's going to want to fly a blended wing body aircraft. I know, I can't wait to do that.
Do you see those mostly going on transcons or trans-Pacific long-haul routes? Is that where that body mostly be used?
That's been the initial announcement by these companies. That's the market they're servicing first. And I think there's economic reasons there of why they're servicing that. And certainly when you talk about fuel efficiency, well, fuel efficiency is important for any route. It's really important for those long haul routes. So that's where they're going to start. But I think you're going to see those once they're certified and in use, you're going to see them scale. They're going to get larger, they're going to get smaller. But yeah, they're going to start there. It's I think that the initial Jet Zero offering, I think, is a 767 kind of size aircraft, and that's what they're shooting to replace.
Do you think they ever scale down to a size of an RJ? Will they ever go on RJ routes?
They certainly could. There's no reason they couldn't. I think, if you think about efficiency, there's more efficiency and more cost savings in the larger aircraft, just from the idea of physics and efficiency. But certainly, there's no reason they couldn't scale down to the RJ routes.
And the thing I think a lot about with RJs and some of those routes, if you look Chicago to Cleveland, for example, eVTOLs. It seems like some of those shorter routes could be replaced with eVTOLs, and I know one of the world's largest airlines was concerned around autonomous vehicles replacing some of the RJ routes. Oh, people can sleep; they don't have to deal with the TSA, and they do all this planning. Do you ever see eVTOLs in some of those short RJ runs filling in?
So the problem with eVTOLs right now is energy density of batteries. And if you look at energy density of batteries, and while there are a few exceptions, there are a few companies trying to build an RJ-like aircraft. The majority of the eVTOLs you're seeing today have a usable range of about 100 miles. And that's really not going to change a lot until the energy density of batteries doubles or triples. And if that can happen, then I think you see that to be more viable, or some other kind of innovation. I don't think aerodynamics are going to get us there on the short routes. I think it's the propulsion, the energy density, the technology, and the propulsion is what's going to have to be there to make that happen. So until that happens, I don't think so.
Is propulsion technology to watch? Not eVTOL battery, but propulsion technology to watch for those shorter routes?
Well, again, the eVTOL, the batteries are the propulsion technology. I mean, that is the propulsion. They're all electric. They're 6, 8, 12 rotor blades, and they're all electric. So and I'm just saying propulsion because I'm not ruling out the idea that, maybe there's an alternative to batteries. They're going to propel the aircraft through the sky. The only reason I say propulsion technology. But yeah, for the near term, eVTOLs are electric. They're battery based. And the energy density of those batteries has to come up quite a bit to go much beyond, the 100, 125 mile range they have now.
And you also have the issue around the infrastructure and who's going to fund it. Can you depreciate it? And what does that look like? There's a lot of challenges that still have to be overcome. There's a lot of opportunity in aerospace and defense. What are some of the most interesting, I'll use my term, fun things that we need to look for over the next couple of years in this sector?
Fun things we need to look for. So let's see, we talked about a few. We talked about flying George Jetson's car. I want to do that. I want to go to orbit. We haven't talked a lot about autonomy and drones. And there's a lot happening there. I know you can see, and I'll move this out of the way. You can see I've got a drone on the table behind me. I think there's drones in the technology in the small consumer sector. There's mid-market drones. There's a great company. Have you heard of the company Zipline?
Yes. A big raise the other day.
Great. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Big company have been doing all kinds of incredible things with kind of the smaller mid-market drone, delivering packages. We're going to see more and more of that. I think we're all going to have packages delivered to us by drone. Then you've got the eVTOLs we talked about, the George Jetson's car, the air taxi level, and then you got the larger drones, the more exquisite kinds of sophisticated drones with companies like Anduril and General Atomics that are filling kind of the CCA market for the next gen, the 6th gen fighters, and being kind of the loyal wingman kind of things. And you're going to see all kinds of really cool, exciting, fun stuff all the way along that market from the small to the big, I think.
Absolutely. Drones are growing. Then you have the noise issue, which I think could eventually be overcome with some of these drones. But would you view the drone market from a package delivery perspective as a potential growth market over the next 5 years?
Certainly, because I think let's look at the example of where I live. I live in Tucson. I live in southern Tucson. I live about 25 miles outside the city of Tucson. Tucson happens to, I'm fortunate that there's a large Amazon delivery factory here, so I can order things and have them in 2 or 3 hours, and I kind of feel guilty because we live a long way out in the country here in the desert in Tucson, and sometimes I'll have 3 Amazon deliveries a day, and I'm thinking that's so inefficient. I hate that somebody's driving all the way out here to deliver a $25 package of something to me. Those kind of deliveries would be so much more efficient, I think, with drones, and I think we're going to see that in the future. And there's regulatory issues to overcome. There's the issues, of, do I really want drones flying over my house all the time? Even though you think from a regulatory standpoint, the FAA allows that. And then there's just the cost and technology of, we talk about batteries and things and the cost of doing it. But it's got to get to a point that it's cheaper than paying somebody to drive their Ford F-150 or their minivan out here to drop packages off, which is what I see driving around all the time. It seems to be a non-sustainable market to me to continue to pay somebody to deliver a $15 package of paper plates that somebody delivered to our house last week, and all the way out here 20 miles south of Tucson.
Well, that's an easy package for a drone. And I'm bullish on drones, and the drones are the technology for the most part has been solid, but now drones start becoming a business. And when it becomes a business is when things are getting insane. And this whole sector is exciting. And this conversation was flat out awesome, Todd. As we look to wrap up for today, what do you want our listeners to take away with them besides the key thing? Aerospace and defense sector is cool and fun. That's my key takeaway. What's your key takeaway?
I'll say it's cool and fun, but there's lots of opportunity too. And maybe I could speak to, I don't know the demographic of your listeners, but there's probably, hopefully, a lot of younger listeners, maybe in high school, college. And if I think about the time when I graduated from college, way back in the dark ages, the cool, sexy, fun technology sector was aerospace. And in the past 10 or so years, that's changed. And there's way more other places that people with engineering degrees and technical backgrounds can go take off and can go do, And what I'd encourage, think about the opportunities in aerospace and think about a career in aerospace. Go to school, get an engineering degree, and use that engineering degree to implement some of this really cool tech that Grayson and I have talked about here today. There's so much opportunity today. There's going to be more in the future. So I'd say it's all about opportunity.
There's a lot of opportunity. Become an engineer, build the world. Today is tomorrow. Tomorrow's today. The future is a growing and thriving aerospace and defense sector. Todd, as always, sir, thank you so much for coming on SAE Tomorrow Today.
And thank you, Grayson. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to SAE Tomorrow Today. If you've enjoyed this episode and would like to hear more, please kindly rate, review, and let us know what topics you'd like for us to explore next.
Be sure to join us next week as we explore how deep cell level testing, large-scale battery data, and simulation tools are changing how engineers optimize battery performance.
SAE International makes no representations as to the accuracy of the information presented in this podcast. The information and opinions are for general information only. SAE International does not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast.